Have you guys not learned anything about me? I am always behind the eight ball. So I can't believe so many of you reached out to me one day and said, well, what'd you think of the verdict? Like 5 minutes after it came in. And I'm thinking, you know it takes me 5 days to get my shit together, but let's give this a try. So yes, today, the Commonwealth versus Karen Read ended in a mistrial. And this was after another note from the jury. They have sent a couple of notes during the deliberation process saying, we really don't think we can come to an agreement here. Today's note, and I'm going to read this because I think it's important. It said they have a sincere adherence to our individual principles and moral convictions. I know people have been dissecting that on here all day. I'm going to go ahead and give my opinion. Plain and simple, that is somebody who had dug in so early and absolutely refused to have their mind changed. Now, let's just presume for a second that that person might have been a prosecution-leaning person. This is just an example. I do not know that to be true. It could have been either way. But let's pretend for a second that they were a prosecution juror. They walked in their very first day and said, I think she killed him. I think she killed him. And they sat through this entire trial, almost 30 days, right? They sat there and said, yep, she did it. Yep, she did it. Yep, she did it. So then when they went in that jury room, there was no changing their mind. None. They could have sat there every day and listened to 75 different witnesses who said, we think John O'Keefe actually died from poisoning and we think it was his mother that did it. That one person would still say, nope, no dice. I think she did it. They would find a way to match the evidence to what they believed because they believed that thing so strongly. People's perception is their truth. And often, once someone gets that dug in, you can't change their mind. Now, that was just a hypothetical. It could have very well gone the other way. There could have been 10 people in there that said, of course she did this. There could have been a couple other people that said, no matter what you say, I'm never voting to convict this woman. These jurors will probably realize some different things as they're starting to make the interview rounds and as they're starting to be asked tough questions. They're starting to kind of hindsight Monday morning quarterback this thing. I'm hoping some of them will come to the conclusion that a lot of us came to, is that John O'Keefe was not hit by a car. And I think when you're the prosecutor, for this case, you probably didn't even need to prove it was Karen. All they really needed to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, was that he'd been killed by a car. If they could have provided, here's the track marks in the snow, here's the damage to her tires, here is the readouts from the car engine that told us all of these different things, here's not just the taillight, but copious amounts of damage to the back of the car, and then add it all up to all of the bodily injuries that would show how John broke ribs, hurt shoulders, all kinds of contusions, flew, where did he hit his head? Like if they could have ever answered any of those questions and proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that John O'Keefe died by a vehicular incident, then the jury would have pieced together Karen. All you had to do was say, well, she was the only one out there. Her vehicle was the only one big enough and moving fast enough to throw a 200-pound man 20 feet in the air. So that's really all they had to do. And the really sad part is that they had 30 days to do it and still didn't do it. Lawley, Proctor, Buchanan, Paul, everybody that took the stand, they couldn't, without reasonable doubt, make a case that the car killed John. Therefore, if the car didn't kill John, then Karen didn't kill John. And sadly, there was a few jurors in there that just didn't understand that concept. Now stick with me because I want to shift gears real quick and talk about Paul O'Keefe's reaction. I can absolutely understand how devastating it must be to get this far and not have a decision either way, right? I'm struggling with the idea. We all thought it was weird when Brian Albert and Colin and all them came in and sat right behind them the other day. I thought the O'Keefes couldn't possibly think that Karen's really done this, and they're friends with like the Munster family back there. They couldn't possibly be that way. Just out of curiosity, I went back through Paul O'Keefe's testimony today and I looked for any evidence that he really hated Karen or thought she had done this, or if there was any point where he threw her under the bus, but there's just not. In his testimony, he claims that, for the couple of times he met her, she seemed like a nice lady. He testified to a couple of arguments that they had, once in the summer, I believe it was, at Cape Cod, and then once at New Year's in Aruba. But there didn't seem to be any animosity. No, like, well, I told my brother multiple times to stay away from her. She was trouble. There was no testimony like that. He left the stand and I thought The Oki family liked her. And what kills me when I go back and listen to it, and he's talking about Karen and John reuniting at the time of COVID, right? So it's March or April. The kids are learning from home. John doesn't have a job where he can work from home. So John has to go in every day. Karen could have spent that time isolated in her own home, but she didn't. She chose to work from John's home and help those kids with their schooling every single day. And Lolly asked him, and I don't know why Lolly thought this was a good prosecution question, but he asked, was John the legal guardian? And Paul said yes. And he said, what legal responsibility did Karen have? And Paul said, none. She did that out of the kindness of her heart because she loved John and she loved those kids and wanted to do right by them. The arguments of, oh, well, she fed him Dunkin' Donuts, like that was their argument, is that she was spoiling the kids too much. I don't know how you go from that woman to thinking that woman who helped your niece and nephew when you guys didn't step up. And maybe that's why they're angry, is because during the trial, testimony came out where Karen had said to multiple people, I just wish his family would do more. Like, we're really burdened with these kids. I really wish the family would do more. Maybe that's what set him off. But he seemed really pissed at Karen today, and he seemed to really side with the idea that she is guilty. It's almost as if he's gotten a phone call from Brian Albert. Now, what's scary to me is that I can't imagine that the thin blue line or the loyalty he feels to the police stronger than the loyalty he feels to identifying his brother's real killer. But that might be the case. I think there's more to be seen. This guy's got to get on like 2020 and do an interview so we can understand what's going on in his head. But they're back in court July 22nd. We'll see what the next steps are going to be.